Hey, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. I'm Jay Warmke with solarpvtraining.com. And if you're new to this format, what we do here is it's an interactive session. We have folks online. We're also recording this, of course. And we will go through what's happening this week in the world of solar, the latest news. Then I'll also just update folks on what webinars are coming up, other conferences. And then we go into a deep dive on an item that's of interest to me and hopefully others who are very interested in solar. This week we have a guest who will be speaking with us about how solar on your home or your business affects the price of real estate and perhaps other factors around that. I don't want to get too deep into it. So let's go ahead and jump into what's happening in the world of solar for the week of March 9th. So the U.S. Energy Information Administration, or the EIA, released their electric generation data last week for 2024, which gives us a pretty good picture of what's happening or what did happen last year in solar generation. Solar and wind continued to grow at the same time that coal continued its long-term decline. Natural gas had a small increase in generating capacity and remains the country's top fuel for electric generation. Natural gas power plants generated 43.3% of the country's electricity last year. That's up from 43.2%, just a small gain from 2023. Utility scale renewables, which include wind, solar, and hydro, were 22.7%, which was up from 21.4%. Nuclear was at 18.2%, down from 18.5%. And coal had the biggest drop. It went from 16.1% down to about 15.2%. EIA projects that this trend is going to continue into 2025 as wind and solar dominate new generation sources. EIA projects that solar plus storage will account for about 81% of all new electric generation this year, and that wind will provide about 12%, with natural gas accounting for around 7% of new generation. Nuclear and coal are not slated to add any additional capacity this year. Electric generators report that they plan to retire 8.1 gigawatts of coal-fired generating capacity this year, which is about just under 5% of the total U.S. coal fleet. And this is double the rate of retirements of coal-fired generation as last year. And Texas widened its lead as the country's renewable energy leader in 2024. Texas's dominance in renewable energy started with the growth of wind farms in the late 2000s, early 2010s. And in recent years, Texas become a leader in utility scale solar, trailing and then surpassing California in this generation from this source. Last year, Texas generated 83% more renewable energy than runner-up California, and Iowa ranks a distant third, and that's almost entirely due to wind energy. Not a lot of solar yet. Despite a lot of investment and talk of a bright future in powering data centers, nuclear power was essentially unchanged in 2024. In April of last year, the Vogtle number 4 nuclear reactor came online in Georgia. That's only the third nuclear reactor to come online since 1980 in the United States. The Vogtle number 3 came on in 2023. Construction of the Vogtle units 3 and 4 began in 2009. Initially, they were projected to cost around $14 billion and take 8 years to complete. It actually cost about double that, coming in at over $30 billion to complete, and it took over 15 years. Meanwhile, 8 nuclear reactors have been retired over the last 7 years, with another one, the Diablo Canyon reactor in California, it's set to be retired this year. Currently, according to EIA, there are no nuclear power plants under construction in the U.S. And I did look, and it was very unclear. I could not find whether there were any that had even gotten through the permitting process. I mean, nothing's under construction, but it looks like nothing is really set for permitting. And from my reading of everything, you say, okay, it takes about 5 years for permitting. It also takes, obviously, from the Vogtle about 15 years to construct. So all of this hype about nuclear, we're really looking at least a decade and probably 2 decades before any nuclear would actually become a reality here in the US. The transition to cleaner vehicles continues in Europe, where 49% of the new city buses across the EU were zero emission models instead of fossil fuel powered. That was last year. This is according to a new analysis from the European Federation for Transport and Environment. The transition to electric mass transit beat the previous year's numbers, 2023's numbers, where 36% of the new vehicles were non-emission vehicles. For 2024, the electric buses made up about 46% of this, and fuel cell powered buses were the other 3%. The analysis determined that new European regulations established last year, as well as additional local policies at the city level, helped in this transition. EU's Clean Vehicle Directive mandates that at least 32% of all heavy-duty trucks and buses purchased throughout the EU from 2026 through 2030 must be zero emissions. The legislation further requires that all bus sales be 90% zero emission by 2030 and 100% by 2035. But T&E estimates that at this rate, clean vehicle adoption for city buses is going to reach that 100% zero emission in the EU by 2027, which is about 8 years ahead of what they're projecting. And since I'm a roll about anti-nuclear here today, the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, described as the nation's most contaminated nuclear site, is perhaps going solar. During the Cold War, this site was expanded to include 9 nuclear reactors, as well as 5 large plutonium processing complexes. These produced plutonium for most of the more than 60,000 nuclear weapons that were part of the U.S. arsenal. The site was shut down in 1989. That year, the Washington Department of Ecology, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, as well as the Department of Energy, they formed a committee to begin to clean up this site, which very quickly became the world's largest environmental cleanup project. In 2014, it was estimated that to complete this cleanup, it's going to take at least $113 billion to clean that site. Now, 10,300 acres of this site that the government has now determined have been cleaned up to the point where they can be developed, have been repurposed or sold or leased to solar developer Hecate, I think it's pronounced. The project is expected to be completed by 2030. It's going to cost about $4 billion. It will generate about 2,000 megawatts of electricity, which is enough power to service the needs of the cities of Seattle, San Francisco, and Denver. It will make it the largest solar array in the United States, far exceeding the current largest, which is the Copper Mountain Solar Facility in Nevada, which generates about 102 megawatts of energy, so more than double that size. And the amount of land, I like this one. The amount of land needed for renewable energy projects is often criticized, but the new study points out that in countries like the US and the UK, much more land is needed for golf courses than for renewable energy. According to this recent study published by the Environmental Research Communications Group, in 2024, there were about 38,400 golf courses in the world, about 80% of them located in just 10 countries. With about 16,000 courses in the US. That tops the list, followed by the UK, and then followed by Japan. Based on the amount of land required for wind and solar farms per kilowatt of generation, the study determined that golf courses use about 4 times as much land as is currently devoted to renewable energy. The study also points out that golf courses have an outsized environmental impact compared to other uses because of the amount of chemicals they use, as well as the amount of water for the land. And that's a bittersweet story since I like both renewable and golf. So, and that's the news from the solar industry for this week. Anybody have anything they want to add? to what I dug up this week. Give me just a second. News on the horizon. All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump into some of the events that are coming up. So let's see. Oh, I wanted to, whoops, I just clicked on something here, which got rid of my visual. Okay. Yeah. Before I get into this, I wanted to share this thing. I'll probably never be invited again because I'm sharing this, but I got this email inviting me to speak, and speak was very much in quotes at an energy summit in Washington, DC, and we get to be in a closed room with no reporters, with all of these congressmen and my favorite senator, Ted Cruz, and my speaking will only cost me about, what was it, about $8,800, I think. So it's let's see, about $8,000 I can speak. So rather than them paying me to speak, I get to pay them for being in the room. But for the low price of $15,000, I can be considered a bronze sponsor of this thing. And they make a big point here of basically saying this is an invitation only, closed room, no reporters, no records, no notes. Nobody's going to write down anything. And I was thinking, it just reminds me of that saying from Lily Tomlin, no matter how cynical you get, it's never enough. This just feels so icky. I mean, I know this is the way it works, but I didn't want to be invited. So anyway, that's interesting. I just thought I'd share that with you. Also, I did attend this session on AI, nuclear, and data, because I guess I'm kind of on a rant right now with data centers and nuclear, where all the tech bros are talking about nuclear, and it just grates at my mind, because to me, it's just so patently obvious that it's not going to work that way. Why on earth would you invest in a technology that's, first off, not going to be physically ready to meet the need that you have, but it's also going to cost you 5 to 10 times as much as all the alternatives, and it creates an environmental protest backlash? Why would you do it? You're not going to do it. So they're just chasing grant money that you can get in those closed door meetings in Washington, D.C. So that's really the only part. But I attended this session. I was wanting to see what the insiders were saying. Basically, I don't know quite how to. They were good, but it was sort of a lot of, I love the term, the jazz hands. It's like, don't look over here. We're going to talk about what's going on over here. They were acknowledging that basically if everything went right, it probably wouldn't work. So that was, but they didn't say it that way. They said it in a lot of ways. We got a lot of information about plutonium mining. That was interesting, I guess. I didn't realize that we have to rely on Kazakhstan for all of our plutonium. So that made me feel better, So no problem getting all of our fuel from former Soviet states. So I just thought I'd report on that. There was nothing there, at least in my opinion. And I'm jaded on that. I'll admit that. But okay, March 12th, that's tomorrow. Solarc is going to have a webinar. If you're interested, at 1 p.m. Eastern time, all of these, again, I'm giving you times on Eastern, and they are, if you need to find them, hopefully there's enough clues in what I'm saying here that you can Google it. If not, contact me and I'll try and point you in the right direction. But we mentioned Solarc a lot for those people who are wanting to go completely off grid. It's a good system, American made. So if you're interested in that system, there's a webinar there by Renvu. Then there's a conference coming up in Phoenix on finance and investment. There's also a webinar on battery innovations. This is going to be on the 20th at 2 p.m. Eastern, sponsored by Solar Power World. Solar Builder is putting on a session on virtual power plants. This is going to be at 3 p.m. Eastern on the 20th. Then there's a webinar on the 25th about all of the above, basically growth demand options, how you're going to meet that demand. We've had discussions in this forum before about how for the last couple of decades demand on the grid has essentially been flat, and we're about to enter into sort of a hockey stick if we're not already in the process of it, where a number of things are converging all at the same time. Well, of course, we have increased affluence, which causes an increase in use. But then you add on top of that artificial intelligence and the rise of data centers, which has a huge impact on the amount of electricity. Then you also add in the electrification of vehicles, you add in Bitcoin and those kind of cryptocurrencies where one coin requires about $40,000 worth of electricity to generate. All of these things combining, we're going to just see a massive increase in demand. And how is the grid going to meet that demand, especially when you've got like a 5-year permitting for interconnection in a lot of locations? There's a conference, Distributech, coming up March 24th through the 27th in Dallas, Texas. And the NABCEP conference in Reno, Nevada is going on at the same time if you're interested there. April 1st, using available software tools in your solar business is coming up through Solar Power World. There's another one on homeowner trends, and maybe we'll get some touching on this with Catherine today. And then there's May 19th through the 22nd Clean Power Conference in Phoenix, Arizona. And then, of course, there are our blatant self-promotion here on solarpvtraining.com, which is our in-person and our hybrid online courses that are always available. And that's what came across my desk this week. Does anybody else, again, have anything you want to add to that? Events coming up or things that crossed your desk as you've had a little bit of time to think about it? Just saying. Everybody's being quiet today. All right, so we'll go ahead and jump in, and hopefully you'll have some questions today for our guests. We're going to be talking about how solar can affect the price of real estate for your home, for your business. And our guest today is Catherine Hope Cunningham. And Catherine, I guess, Catherine, I met you, back in 2014 when you went through the solar training, became certified. And in looking at your bio here, you became ETA certified in solar back in 2014, and you became a realtor in 2016. So solar won your heart first. So
that's right.
There you go. And then you recently received the Columbus Board of Realtors President's Award for Sales. I assume that means you're good at what you do. And you've been taking your son around college shopping, which is
that's right.
Always an exciting thing. So
Catherine,
anything else you want to say about yourself?
No, actually it was solar that got me into real estate because I spent 2 years in people's homes and doing site assessments and crawling up into people's attics. And I just got excited about, the real estate market and being in homes. And I find that the marriage of the two industries is really exciting. So I want to talk today about sort of an overview of how solar affects real estate valuation and other market trends. I wanted to point everybody to a resource which you should be able to use anytime you want to talk about these things and back it up with statistics. We'll reference certain pages of that. I want to then take how we look at that particular report and then how that translates into regional markets. So because I want to talk about regional markets today, I would love it if everybody could put into the chat where home is for you. If you could please give me the city and state, because depending upon where everyone is, that will potentially affect some things that I talk about. And I kind of figured everybody, of course, Jay and I are in Ohio, but I kind of figured everybody would be coming from various parts of the world. So far, everybody is in the United States. I see at least 3 people from Ohio. Okay.
I know we got one person from Canada, British Columbia anyway.
Fantastic.
Mhm.
Okay, great. So, Jay, can I share? Is it
Yep,
possible for me to share now?
you should be able to. Let's see.
Okay. All right. So, can everybody see
We can.
what's
I
on my screen?
can.
Okay, so I just want to first give you an opportunity to find me after we're done here. If you have any questions, you can always find me either at my website, Sunny Side of CBUS, which is short for Columbus, or you can find me on Google. Catherine Hope Cunningham, realtor and solar consultant. The resource that I want to reference today is something that should be easily findable at any time. And anytime someone asks me a question about how solar affects property values, the first thing I do is I go into Google and I pull up NAR sustainability report. And this is published every spring. And because it hasn't been published in 2025 yet, I'm actually going to go to the 2024 report, which is the most recent one. And if you give this another maybe 6 weeks or so, it'll come out in 2025. But the National Association of Realtors publishes an annual sustainability report. And the reason why I like to point to this resource more than any other is because this particular one is not biased by the solar industry in any way. Really, all realtors are trying to do is understand how green features affect their business and their industry and how those trends are changing from year to year. So I feel like this is a pretty unbiased report. And what I want to do today is it's a 20 some odd page report, but we're only going to highlight pages 9, 10, 11, 15, 25, and 26. So the first thing I want to do is jump straight to page 9, because what you'll see here, now this study was sent out to about 45,000 realtors and brokers. About 10% of them responded. So this is reflecting about 4,300 opinions of sales agents as well as brokers. And this is how the breakdown appears. I'm going to move my tools so that it's not in the way. So first thing you'll see is that the vast majority of buyers find that energy efficiency is actually a valuable asset in the promotion of their property. So we're looking at about 57% of agents and brokers said that listing something about that property that it has a green feature was actually a positive thing in the promotion of their listing. About 1/4 of them said, oh, I really don't have an opinion one way or the other, but very few of them said that that was not valuable information. So does that necessarily translate into, maybe it's valuable information, but does that necessarily translate into value as far as dollars are concerned? I think a lot of that has to do with where you are. And when I say where you are, I mean geographically. So later on, we're going to show you some geographic breakdowns. So this particular page in the report shows that about 80% of markets or MLSs have solar panels in their market. So it's at this point, it's not a new or novel thing anymore. There's homes with solar panels and businesses with solar panels on the market. 80% of them say yes, those are in our market. Now, the interesting thing of the breakdown at the bottom of the page, at this time, there's not a strong opinion about whether or not they increase value or decrease value. You can see that there are more agents and brokers that say that they increase value that there are that say they decrease value. But about half of the agents and brokers say, well, there's either no effect or I really don't know. On page 11, this is talking about the amount of time or days on market that solar properties spend on the MLS. And again, here, the vast majority of agents and brokers are saying, well, there's really not a strong opinion one way or the other. It's neither more or less time. And more than half of them said neither more or less time or it's unclear. So there's really not a strong cause and effect on how many days on the market. So I'd like to go down now into page 15 and highlight something very interesting. When you are listing a property, there are certain things that buyers look towards when they're looking for their house, and there's a definite hierarchy. And you can see if you look at this particular page on number 4, a home's utility bills and operation costs actually rank number 4 as what is most important to the buyer. So if the home does have green features, yes, we obviously want to promote that because the vast majority of buyers are interested in looking at that. But here are all the other things that they're interested in looking at as well. I will say, now that we're talking about the home's utility bills and operation costs, that when I promote a home, rather than focusing on the solar, which, as you can see in the next slide, which I'll jump down to 25 now. I skipped one. Here we go. The perception of consumer interest in sustainability. So the vast majority of consumers are either very interested or somewhat interested. So 45% of consumers are interested in sustainability. And because of that, I am going to list the solar as an asset when I talk about listing a property. However, it is not necessarily universally appealing because, as you can see here, about 11% are very uninterested and 15% are somewhat uninterested. And so when you are listing a solar property, one thing that is absolutely universally appealing across the board is lower electric bills. So rather than promote the solar of part of that listing, I actually talk more about the low electric bills because regardless of who you are, everybody loves low electric bills. And if we break that down later on in the report, this actually breaks it down. And this is part of the reason why I wanted to know where everybody is. It really depends a lot on your regional market. So if you look at the center section of this where it says rooftop solar panels effect on property values, look at the very vast difference between how the Midwest feels about solar arrays and how the West population feel about it. There's a pretty drastic difference. And I will say that if you had been tracking that like I have for the last couple of years, the Midwest feels very differently now than they did in 2019. And I did a quick Google of the NAR report in 2019, and this is actually the breakout from 2019, so 5 years ago. So take a look at the center section, which reports the exact same numbers. And you'll see that 5 years ago, the Midwest said that 36% said that they increase value and no people said that they decrease value. And the West actually had slightly lower statistics. And then fast forward to today, and you'll see that the Midwest opinion, they have definitely developed an opinion, and 22% say that they increase value as opposed to 26% say that they decrease value. And then in the West, the opinion is very strong that they increase value rather than decrease.
So Catherine, are you seeing any issues around solar plus storage as opposed to just solar? Is that something where you say, okay, this thing is set up so that if the grid goes down, do people value that, or have they just not gotten into that yet?
If I had a listing, I would absolutely promote it, because there are people who are definitely looking for that. I don't know that there's anyone who is opposed to being independent, energy independent. So certainly it was something I would draw attention to. But that being said, Jay, because like 90+% of the arrays are grid tied, I find it so rarely. In fact, I've never actually had, or even any of my colleagues have had a standalone system that's, battery. And so because of that, there's really no statistics one way or the other.
Mhm.
The vast majority of them are either grid tied or hybrid.
Well, one thing that occurred to me while you were speaking was, um, if I invested, let's say my house, I will just say a theoretical house that's on the market. You're in Columbus, I'm in Marietta, so the prices are going to be very different. But
Mhm.
let's say I know the average home is $400,000 now nationwide. I don't know what it goes for in Columbus. Here in Marietta, it's like $4.75. So that's nice. But in Columbus, let's say $300,000 home, and you just spent $30,000 on a solar array.
Mhm.
Would you expect to receive back comparable? Like could you get 330,000 or would you get 305,000? I mean,
That's
what kind of payback? And it depends on the age, I'm sure, but
I love that question because I get it on almost every single inquiry I've ever had with
yeah.
solar. What's the payback? And first, I reframe the question. Um, First, I want to bring attention to what is your ROI on the money that you're giving AEP right now, or whoever your energy provider is, and that is of course zero. So the other thing that I like to say is if you're planning on living in your home for somewhere between 5 to 7 or 5 to 8 years, I would not even worry about the answer to this question, because if it is your plan to be in this property for at least another 5 to 8 years, you will have recouped all your money anyway. So um, I wouldn't worry too much about how that's going to affect the property value, but that is actually what we're going to focus on next. And I'm going to pull some statistics from the Columbus MLS so that you can see. But Jay, the real answer to your question is the thing that affects property values more than any other factor is not the house's attributes, whether it's solar or there's other assets like it has a pool or it has tankless water heater or something like that. The thing that affects it more than any other variable is what the rates are doing at any given time. So when the rates go up, the property valuation either flattens, or sometimes if the rates go up for too long, those property values can go down.
Mhm.
But as we've seen from basically 21 to 2023, when the rates go down, the property values tend to skyrocket. And it really, though, that's what drives the property values more than anything. And I will say that if your property does have some sort of asset like that, like solar or a pool or tankless water heater or whatever, yes, it can bring more money, but what actually brings the property value up organically more than anything is what are the rates doing? Are they going down? Then there's going to be lots of competitive bidding on that home.
Yeah, so that makes sense because, of course, people are looking at what is the monthly payment. So
Right.
obviously, that's going to be a balance. I guess the other question, which is related to that I had was, are banks beginning to see the value of the fact that you don't have electric bills
Yep.
in qualifying people for higher mortgages because now
Always.
they're out of pocket? So,
Always, yes. So, and I'm actually going to give you an example of that. And that would have been in, oh gosh, this goes all the way back to 2018, I think it was, where a friend of mine was pre-approved for 350,000, and they were looking for some acreage in Southeast Ohio, and they found some that was listed at, I think it was 380. And the bank actually approved them for the purchase of that house because it had a solar array on it. I think it was a 7.5 kilowatt system. And the lender said, yes, you can go ahead and purchase that house, even though it is above what we have pre-approved you for, because when you factor in the fact that there's not going to be much of an electric bill there, then that raises your buying power. So that's a good question.
mhm.
I'm
Okay.
actually going to give you two examples, Jay, since you brought it up. So these are homes that I have sold. This 413 Clemson that's on the screen right now. If you look at the top right, I don't know if you can see me circling this, but see where it says days on market. This particular one was listed in 2022, and this is when the rates were extremely low. And this, they were in the general 3% range, and everyone was clamoring to purchase a house before the rates went up. And this particular solar home, this was in Gahanna, Ohio, and this was only on the market for 3 days. The list price was 264,900. And if you scroll down and look in the bottom right, you'll see the selling price was 280. So, and in 3 days, that that home sold for well above the list price. And like I said, this was in 2022. Now, obviously it's snowing in this picture. It was February 2022, so not a great time to sell a solar house, but this one absolutely flew off the market, no problem. Now, fast forward a couple of years to, well, actually, not even a couple of years. Fast forward a couple of months. This one was in June 2022. And this is also a solar home, also in Gahanna, Ohio. And what happened at the beginning of June, I think it was somewhere around the 5th of June, the Fed met, they raised interest rates, the largest interest rate jump, I think it was 3/4 of a point in one day. And that was the largest interest rate jump since, I think, the mid 90s or something like that. And what happened is it instantly slowed the market down. And the statistics on this one are not horrible, but they're also not nearly as impressive as the one from 4 months before. So the statistics on this one, you can see in the top right, days on market, 8 days. So slightly longer on the market, not terrible, but slightly longer. The list price on this one was 434,900, and this one sold for 419,900. So again, solar has very little effect on how much you can't really say, if I put $30,000 into solar, can I get all $30,000 back? A lot of the answer to that question depends on timing, when you sell your home and what the market rates are doing at that time.
Okay. Well, Peter has a question for you. It may be related to that or something.
Go right ahead.
Or go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, Catherine, if you scroll back to your picture from February of 2022,
Sure.
that's what all the solar arrays look like now, and just about for the last 10 years. Prior to that, they didn't. We had panels chipped up on edge. We had some crazy so-called flying the flag arrays and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, that might account for why solar was perceived as not adding value to homes, because it was kind of an obtrusive sort of adventure 20 years ago. And now we're used to seeing them, and we're also used to them being flat parallel to the roof. And there basically are no other mounts today other than flat and parallel to the roof, regardless of the roof orientation. So I
Mhm.
guess what I'm wondering is there any way to sort out the perceptions or anything based on more modern, up-to-date installations versus the living museums that some places look like?
The only the only solar I have ever seen in the MLS has always been flush mount or ground mount, and very rarely ground mount.
Hmm.
So I've really never seen anything other than those two things. So because I've never seen anything other than those two things, I really can't answer that question fairly accurately because it rarely comes up.
Okay.
Have
It
you
could
ever
be that that was just a really small part of the sample set anyways, because there
Right.
wasn't as much solar being installed 20 years ago or even 10 years ago.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
it was
Okay.
just the guys like you, Peter, who had subscriptions to Mother Earth News who were out there.
And, yeah, and home power.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and honestly, the older arrays, I would say, are not going to be adding that much value, if at all. If I were to sell an array, if I were to sell a house that has an array that was not flush mount, that was, 20 years old, 15, 20 years old, I would say let's not factor that in to the valuation of the house, and let's be pleasantly surprised when it does in fact increase the value.
Have
Sounds
you,
good.
Catherine, ever run against some perceptions where the people just basically say, I hate solar, I don't want any part of solar, I'm not going to look at that house because there's solar. And what's sort of motivating me in this is years and years ago when we lived in Florida, I would have always assumed an in-ground pool was added value, but it turned
Right,
out, at least for us,
right.
because there was a small child, we were like, don't show us anything with a pool because we're just not going to buy it. And
And that's exactly, yes, that's exactly why I say you can't assume that it's going to be universally appealing because, yes, there is a certain, uh, let's see what the demographic is. If I go back to my here. If I go back to this, okay, so 16% of the buyers in the world are absolutely disinterested in, the sustainability and green features. There will be some people, and I'm not going to say, I don't think it's quite 16%. I don't think it's quite that high. But there will be some people that as soon as they see the solar panels, they just won't even look at the house. That's a very small percentage of people. But kind of like you, Jay, when you were looking at pools, and if there's a pool, you're just not going to look at the house. So yes, those people do exist. I have never had any backlash from those people. You just don't hear from them. That's all.
do you have any experience with commercial real estate where there's commercial with solar?
I don't. My focus is on at least in real estate anyway, my focus is like 97% residential. I have had some commercial, inquiries and none of them had anything to do with solar. Now, what's interesting is I have had some commercial solar inquiries where I've had some, in fact, the taxi, the local yellow cab in Columbus was thinking about maybe doing solar on their building and providing some EV chargers and that sort of thing. There are some other businesses who have inquired. I've never actually had somebody inquire about selling a solar business, but it would work the same way, essentially.
And speaking of EVs, has anyone brought up or has it been a feature if there is EV
Yeah,
charging at the site?
absolutely. Yes. And so I'm actually going to show you on the MLS here. Um, there is a there is a section of the MLS. I'm not going to bring up the green features part of it, but there is a section of the MLS where you can select a box that says green features, but green features is very widely defined, and it does include things like EV chargers. It includes green sustainable flooring, solar and geothermal, and any of those things. And so, but in our particular MLS, which happens to be the Columbus MLS, there is no button that you can toggle on or off for solar. So instead, what I have to do is go into the property description here and type in solar. And when I do, you can see this is all the blue dots that you're seeing. The one, if I unclick this, all these blue dots are places that have sold in the last 6 months. Okay. So when I toggle this back on in the property description, and every MLS is going to work differently, they're all regional. So your regional MLS may potentially work differently than this. But when I click that button back on where it says solar, as you can see, there's quite a few properties that have closed in the Columbus market that have solar on them. And what I want to do, if I take all of these properties and I put a box around them and I throw them into a list. Oh, my polygon disappeared. Let's try that again. So if I take all of these properties and put them into a list, keep having to move the zoom around to get out of my way. There we go. So what I see is that we have 66 properties in the Columbus and surrounding area. And that actually didn't quite include all of them because I didn't grab all of them. But if we take these 66 properties and throw them into what's called a CMA, which is right up here in the top right. So this stands for comparative market analysis. We're going to do a one-line CMA. Computer is going to think here for a second. And it's going to spit out a list of all of these properties, these 66 properties. At the bottom of this list, you will see an average. So what are we looking at here as far as statistics wise? At the bottom of the page, we see all of the different averages for what's above. And so this is price per square foot, average square foot. DOM stands for days on market. CDOM stands for continuous days on market. And the continuous days on market really only applies if the property went out of contract and then back in to contract. So when I list a property, my goal is always to get this into contract in less than a month. And as you can see, with days on market for the average of these 66 properties, all of these properties averaged less than 30 days on the market. So that's to say that at least in the Columbus MLS area, solar is not making the properties drag on the market. They are selling just as well as every other house, basically. I will say that kind of like what it said in the NAR sustainability report, it doesn't affect it one way or the other too terribly much. It doesn't make it fly off the market, but it also doesn't make it drag onto the market either.
Mhm.
The other thing.
So would you
Go
take
ahead.
away from this then, it kind of as a large scale thing? You would not recommend somebody put solar on thinking that's going to make their house more attractive. You would put
Absolutely
it
not.
on, you would put it on for your own benefit for a
Absolutely.
period of time where you're living there, and if it happens that things change and
Correct.
you're not going to stay there as long as you are, it's not going to really have a negative effect, but it may not, you may not make money on this deal.
No, I wouldn't count on it. And it also is possible if the rates are low. Back in early 2022, I listed a house at 325 and sold it for 380. And so it can, it really just depends on what the economy is doing at the time, what the rates are doing at the time. And you can't really say equivocally that solar increased the amount of property value on your house. You also can't really say that it decreased it either. There's really no evidence one way or the other. And so the other thing that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention, if you take a look in the top right-hand corner, this category that says SP $ percent OLP $. So the SP stands for selling price. The OLP stands for original list price. So if you look down this column right here, you'll see that the vast majority of properties sold for at least 90% of the original list price. Some of them, 36% of them sold at or above what the original list price was. So here's a good example of that one right here. This one sold for 107 and almost 108% of the original list price. So yeah, they're getting good prices, some above, some below, 36% above and 55%, somewhere between 90 to 99% of the original list price. So yeah, that's really all to say. It's not a huge, solar is not a huge factor in the valuation of your home.
Okay. Does anybody have a question here for Catherine? Give you guys a chance to jump in or a comment. Have any of you guys had the experience of trying to sell a home with solar? Yeah.
Jay, I'm going to ask, if nobody else is, I'm going to ask the question I put in the chat. We have solar. We're not planning to leave the house, but and it's a perfect south-facing floor roof, 32 panels, about a decade old at this point. We're beginning to have some maintenance issues, and it's a difficult backyard to get into, and 3 floors up because it's a walkout basement and 2-floor house. And I'm just wondering whether people are going to look at that and say, this is going to be a pain in the neck, because it probably is. Would you, if somebody asks you, should we put solar on, that's not your business, but what's been your experience?
If someone asks me if they should put solar on, I just do, your average site assessment, right? So, I inform them of the feasibility, I inform them of their ROI, I inform them of what the design might look like, or a couple of different options for design. But I've been known to talk people out of solar as much as I talk people into solar, because there are some people who are very excited about the possibility of having green features and solar on their house, but they send me the address and I find that it's, the only usable space is north facing and underneath a tree canopy. And so at that point, you have to really, you do have to help them understand that, sure, you can have solar if you want, but I think you're going to be really disappointed in the ROI. I also think it's going to have disappointing generation and may not save you as much money as you think it's going to save, and that sort of thing. So when I'm doing some consulting and designing these things, I want to make sure that the ROI is pretty appealing. And to me, appealing is defined as somewhere between 5 and 8 years. The closer to 5, the better. But if there are trees in the way, I have to say, if you're the owner, what do you want more, lower electric bills or shade? So it's really kind of up to the electorate, or to the owner.
My question really is that it's a perfect south facing and not much obstruction. It's going to be really difficult for maintenance. And is a buyer going to be looking at that as a headache?
There is no maintenance. If there's no trees around and you don't have branches and squirrels and animals crawling up there, then there really is no maintenance. Aside from, when it rains, it cleans the panels off. You might have to replace inverters occasionally, but not very often. And that doesn't involve. So I would say, as far as maintenance is concerned, look around the array. If there's no trees around, then you can pretty much assume there's not going to be much maintenance either. Now, when people have their gutters cleaned, one of the things that I do tell people is, if you've got a gutter cleaner, hire the gutter cleaner that will also walk around your solar panel and just look underneath it and make sure there's nothing underneath, right? But as long as there's no trees hanging over that house, it shouldn't be a problem.
All right. Do we have one last question? Go ahead, Al.
One question related to financing, or what I hear in my area here. I'm a former realtor, a broker actually.
Yeah.
is that the financing plays a big role on the acceptance of solar. Some see it, so it depends on whether or not you have to assume some kind of loan or obligation when you buy the home. If it was depending on what the financing was. I know there's a lot of data that you collect, and it may be very, very difficult to pinpoint financing is a discriminator. But what would be your personal opinion on that?
Can you clarify the question? What's my personal opinion on what now?
When if I'm going to buy solar, let's
Mhm.
say, and spend $30,000, I could get a loan for that, right?
Yeah, you can. Um,
And come time to sell the house, that there may be an outstanding balance on
ah,
that loan.
so I'm so glad you asked that question. We're going to go back to the list of homes from before, and we're going to bring this. Okay, that means I have to start sharing again. Hold on a second. I'll start sharing again.
I'll answer Al's question as you're preparing on that. The quick answer is don't lease solar panels. Don't ever do
Don't.
that. Never,
Right.
never, never, never. If you're getting a loan, it's probably going to be a personal loan. If it's tied to the house, you probably have a problem.
And honestly, Jay, I think that's factoring into why the statistics in the Midwest have decreased so substantially. I don't think that 5 years ago that leased solar was part of a residential market the way that it is right now. So I think it does have an effect. But to answer your question, if I go back to the listing, this 413 Clemson, I actually included in the documents information specifically on solar. And I was very upfront, and in red letters up here at the top of this, it says, note to buyers, the solar array is owned, not leased. The sellers will pay off their solar loan at closing. And that's really what the buyers want to know. Do we have any responsibility in this at all? And the answer should be always no. The seller should, if there is a loan, the seller should pay it off. And that's what I advise every time.
Okay.
That's a really good question.
Well, Catherine, I'm going to have to cut it off here. I appreciate your joining us, and I appreciate everybody else and all the questions we got. And as per always, we'll meet again next week at noon on Tuesday. So thanks everybody for your attention. All right. Thanks, Catherine.